So I just wanted you guys to be able to see that trigonometry doesn't have to be so complicated. Some of you guys may be going into geometry next year. Some of you may be taking your AccuPlacer, and there's going to be trigonometry questions on there. So I just want you guys to see that trigonometry can be easily understood. I know it sometimes can seem intimidating, but it doesn't have to be. And this is what this video is for. Just to give you guys a brief overview, and hopefully by the end of this video, you'll be like, okay, Miss Amber went over trigonometry with me, the basics, and now I feel more comfortable if I ever have to do it in the future. So let's get started. One of the popular terms that you'll hear in trigonometry is SOHCAHTOA TOA, and it's just a way for you to remember whenever you need to use sine, cosine, or tangent. So whenever you're dealing with a trigonometry problem, you're either going to have to deal with using an equation for sine, an equation for cosine, or an equation for tangent. And so you're going to need to know which one to use in which scenario. So this just helps you to understand, okay, when do I use sine, when do I use cosine, and when do I use tangent? So what I like about this is that next to each of these, they have the letters of the sides of the triangle that you need in order to use each one of them. So the O, and if you're writing notes, O just stands for the opposite side, the H stands for the hypotenuse, and the A stands for the adjacent side. So if you're going to use sine, you need to have the opposite and the hypotenuse. If you're going to use cosine, you need the adjacent side and the hypotenuse. If you're going to use tangent, you need the opposite side and the adjacent side. Now, I'm going to show you what those sides actually mean in terms of a triangle, but right now, I just want you to understand SOHCAHTOA TOA is a way to remember what sides you need in order to use which sine, cosine, or tangent. Okay, so I hope that that wasn't too confusing, because I want you guys to see that this can be simple. It doesn't have to be overcomplicated. So let's go ahead and see what are the sides of a triangle in terms of an angle. So oftentimes when you're doing trigonometry, there's an identified angle. So I'm going to go ahead and identify this angle, and I'm going to say it's X degrees, or we can call it angle X, either way. So in terms of this angle, let's identify the opposite side, the hypotenuse, and the adjacent. So if you just draw an arrow from the angle to the opposite side of the triangle, that side is called the opposite. So this side, the blue side, this side is going to be considered the opposite side. Now, across from the right angle is the hypotenuse. So if you're ever looking for the hypotenuse, find the right angle, and the right angle is just identified by the little box. Draw a line across from the right angle, and you've now found the hypotenuse, the side called the hypotenuse. So we identified the opposite, the hypotenuse. Now let's identify what the adjacent would be. The adjacent side would be this side. And the reason why it's called the adjacent side is because it's adjacent to the angle, or it's next to the angle. You can always identify the adjacent side because this side actually makes up part of the angle. So this would be considered the adjacent side. So we've identified the opposite side, the hypotenuse, and the adjacent. Now, once we master this skill of just identifying the sides, doing trigonometry is going to be so much easier for us. So I just want to do 2 more examples of just figuring out what the sides are in relation to an angle, and then we can move forward with some example problems. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to draw 2 more triangles, and I'm just going to use the aid of my iPad. I think I love this feature so much. So let me just do that. Okay, so let's start with this first example. I'm going to go ahead and make a right triangle, and I'm going to say that this is going to be the angle again. Okay, so now I just have to identify the opposite, the hypotenuse, and the adjacent. So if you remember, the opposite is you draw an arrow from the angle to the opposite side. So this side right here would be the opposite. Then if I want to look for the hypotenuse, I draw a line across from the little box or the right angle, and that's the hypotenuse. And then the adjacent side is whatever side that is also part of the angle. So it would be this side would be the adjacent side. Okay, so now what if the angle is up top here? So now again, the opposite, the hypotenuse, and the adjacent side, it has to be in relation to the angle. So I'll show you how this works when the angle is a different one. So I'm going to go ahead and write my right triangle still. Okay, so opposite, you take a line from the angle that's identified across from it, and that is considered the opposite. So this would be the opposite side. You take the right angle and you go across from it, and that's the hypotenuse. And then the adjacent side is whatever side is also part of the angle. It's attached to the angle. It's adjacent. So now we've identified the sides determined by where the angle is. Once you master the skill, you've mastered the majority of what you have to know in order to do these types of equations. So we identified what SOHCAH TOA means. SOHCAH TOA is just a way for you to remember whether or not you're using sine, cosine, or tangent. The letters next to the sine, cosine, and tangent, those are identifying what sides you need. So for sine, you need the opposite and hypotenuse. Cosine, you need adjacent and hypotenuse. And the tangent, you need opposite and adjacent. Then we just learned very briefly how to identify the sides in terms of the angle. You draw a line across from the angle, that's the opposite. You draw a line across from the hypotenuse, across from the right angle, and that's the hypotenuse. And then the line that's attached to the angle is called the adjacent. So I want us to talk briefly about what this actually means in terms of an equation. So with SOHCAH TOA, first you have to decide whether or not you're using sine, cosine, or tangent. And the way that you figure that out is you look at the problem. So we're going to look at this problem number 1. You look at the problem and you ask yourself, what information are they given? So what sides are you given? And then based on what sides you're given, then you know whether you're using sine, cosine, or tangent. So let's go ahead and look at this first problem and try to identify what sides we're given. So again, if you look at this angle X, I'm going to draw my arrow across. Across from the angle, that would be the opposite side. So we are given one side, which is the opposite side. And then if you go across from the right angle, you're given the hypotenuse. So we are given, in this example problem, we have the opposite and the hypotenuse. So when you have the opposite and the hypotenuse, then what do you need to use? Sine, cosine, or tangent? Well, if you look at the SOHCAH TOA, if you're going to use sine, you need to have the opposite and the hypotenuse, which we have. So we are going to use the equation for sine. So how do we figure out what the equation for sine is? Again, we can use SOHCAH TOA. So we're using sine. So this is the only part we have to focus on. So sine of angle X is going to be equal to, and it's in order, opposite over hypotenuse. So if you can remember SOHCAH TOA, then not only can you remember what sides you need for each, but you can also have the equations right in there. Whatever letter comes first goes on the top, whatever letter comes second goes on the bottom. So now let's go ahead and fill in the information that we have for this problem. So we have sine of angle X is equal to, the opposite was 4, and the hypotenuse is 5. Okay, so I totally don't have my calculator. I gotta find where I put it. So sorry. Okay. Okay, here it is, you guys. Sorry about that. Okay, so the first thing you do in order to solve this problem is you figure out what 4 over 5 is equal to. And 4 over 5 is equal to 4 divided by 5. So 4 divided by 5 is 0.8. So we're finding the sine of X is equal to 0.8. So what you're going to do with your calculator, and I'm sorry for not mentioning in the beginning that you're going to need a calculator. A scientific calculator would be the most helpful. I'm using the scientific calculator TI-84 Plus, from Texas Instruments. It's like 100 years old, but I love it. I've been using it for a few years now. I'll put a picture in the community tab once I post this video, just so you can see which one I'm using. But you will need a scientific calculator that allows you to put in sine, cosine, or tangent. Okay, so back to the equation. How do I put this into a calculator? Well, what I do is I go ahead and I type second, then I write sine. So second sine, and what you should see in your calculator after you type that in is sine -1, parentheses. And then go ahead and enter that 0.8 into the parentheses, 0.8, close the parentheses, and then hit enter. After you hit enter, you should get 53.13. What is this equal to? Well, it's 53 degrees, which is equal to our angle X. So our angle X would be 53 degrees. Excuse me. Okay, so we found our first problem. Now we're going to keep repeating this with cosine, with tangent, so that you can feel confident with this. So please don't give up. We learned about how to identify the sides, which equation to use, how to figure out the equation, and then what to put in our calculators. The thing about it is that most people will end the video here because they feel like they've seen enough, but then they won't feel confident with this. Confidence comes from repetition. So we're just going to need to repeat this process a few times. And I'm so sorry, my neighbors are getting work done, and I'm sorry that this video is so chaotic, but anyways, that's kind of what we do here on my channel. So let's go ahead and go to our next question. Question 2. So again, the first step is we try to identify what sides we have. So I'm going to go ahead and say across from the right angle is the hypotenuse. And then we have this side, which is attached to the angle, so it's the adjacent angle. So we are given the adjacent, and we're given the hypotenuse, and we have an angle. So I'm going to go ahead and look at my SOH CAH TOA, and I'm going to ask myself, what do I use if I have the adjacent and I have the hypotenuse? And I'm going to look at this, and I'm going to say I use cosine because I have the adjacent and I have the hypotenuse. So let's go ahead and write our equation. Cosine of angle X is equal to, and again, the order you keep the same. Adjacent goes on top, and then hypotenuse is on the bottom. So let's go ahead and solve this. It should be really simple. So cosine of angle X is equal to the adjacent, which was 3, over the hypotenuse, which is 9. The first thing we do is 3 over 9 in our calculators. So we do 3 divided by 9, which is equal to 0.33. And cosine of X is equal to 0.33. Now we go ahead and put this into our calculator. How do we do that? We do second cosine. So second cosine. And what should come up in your calculator is cosine to the -1, parentheses. That's when you're going to add the 0.33, and we're going to close the parentheses. And then we're going to hit enter. And after we hit enter, we get 70.7. So what does this mean in terms of X? It means that the X, or the angle X, is 70.7 degrees. So we just found what the measurement of angle X is. Let's go ahead and go to our next one. It's way more simple than we make it out to be. It doesn't have to be complicated. So again, we have a new problem. We're now going to identify what sides we have. So when you go across from the angle, that's the opposite. So we have the opposite side. And then when you have an angle, you have a line that is part of the angle, then that's the adjacent side. So we have the opposite and we have the adjacent. So when you have opposite and adjacent, do you use sine, cosine, or tangent? If you guess tangent, you're correct. So let's go ahead and write the equation. Tangent of measure X is equal to, and it's in the order, opposite is on top, adjacent is on the bottom. And then we're going to go ahead and solve this. First we're going to put in what we have. So the opposite is 3, the adjacent is 4, is equal to tan of angle X. We're going to do 3 divided by 4 in our calculators, which is just 0.75. So we're going to do tan of X. And then what do we do in order to put this into our calculator? Again, we do second tangent, and what should appear is tan to the -1, parentheses, put in that 0.75, close the parentheses, hit enter. So I'm going to do second tan 0.75, close parentheses, enter, and you should get 36.86. What does this mean in terms of the angle? That means the angle is about 37 degrees. So it just shows that this seems complicated, but it doesn't have to be. We now know how to figure out the sides. We know how to figure out which equation we're going to use. We know how to put together an equation just by figuring out the letters. You follow the order. Whatever letter comes first goes on top. Whatever letter comes second goes on the bottom. And then we've learned to put it into our calculators in order to figure out an answer. This is what you follow for sine, cosine, and tangent when you don't know what the measure is for the angle. But sometimes you do know what the measure is for the angle. You have to figure out a missing side. So let's go ahead and see how we apply sine, cosine, and tangent when we have the measure of the angle, but we're finding a missing side. So the first step is still the same. Identify what sides you have. You still use the angle that you're given. This is the angle that we're given. And so we're going to identify what sides we have. Even if one of the sides is missing, we're still identifying. So this x side is the opposite, because if you take an arrow from your angle and go to the opposite side, it lands there. So we have the opposite, and then whatever is across from the right angle, that's the hypotenuse. So because we have opposite and hypotenuse, are we using sine, cosine, or tangent? Okay, we're using sine. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to write the same equation. Sine of the angle, but instead of writing x, we actually know what the measurement of the angle is. So we're going to do sine of 30 is equal to, and we're still using the same equation, opposite over hypotenuse. So let's go ahead and fill in what we know. Opposite is going to be x this time, hypotenuse is 10, sine of 30. Because we now know what the measure of the angle is, instead of entering into our calculator second sine, we're going to forget about that. We're just going to enter into our calculator sine. And so if you were sine, then there should be a parentheses, put in the number 30, close the parentheses. So sorry, sine 30, close the parentheses, hit enter, and then you should get 0.5. So 0.5 is equal to x over 10. Again, when you know what the measurement of x is, or when you know the measurement of the angle is, then you can just put sine and then the number. You don't have to do the second sign. You just put sine and then the number, and then hit enter, and you get 0.5. Okay, now that you have 0.5, I'm going to go ahead and put it over 1. I'm putting it over 1 just so I can cross multiply, because now that they're two fractions, I can easily cross multiply. Now this is going back to your algebra knowledge. So we're going to go ahead and cross multiply. 1 times x is 1x. And then we're going to do 0.5 times 10. You have a calculator, so go ahead and use it. 0.5 times 10 is 5. So 1x is equal to 5, or x is equal to 5. So the missing side was the opposite side, x. So if we found what x is equal to, that means the measure of the opposite side is 5 units tall. Okay, we're going to do this 2 more times with cosine and tangent for you to be able to see that this is not very difficult. It's literally just knowing which equation to use and how to enter it into your computer, or how to enter it into your calculator, I'm sorry. So when you're entering it into your calculator, if you don't know what the angle is, then you do second sine or second tangent, second cosine. If you are given the angle measure, then instead of doing the second something, all you have to do is just write whatever it is, sine, cosine, or tangent, and then put in the number, and then figure out what decimal it is equal to. We're going to do that 2 more times so that you feel more confident with it. Okay, so let's identify what sides we have. So we have this side, which is x, and we have this side. So if you go across from the right angle, it's the hypotenuse. So for this one, we have the hypotenuse. And because this is the angle that we're looking at now, this side would be considered the adjacent. Why? Because it's part of the angle. It's right next to the angle that we're talking about. So we have the adjacent and we have the hypotenuse. Which one are we going to use? Sine, cosine, or tangent? Well, we're going to go ahead and use cosine because you need the adjacent and the hypotenuse. So now we're going to go ahead and write our equation. The cosine of the angle, now we know what the angle measure is, 25, is equal to, and then we're going to do adjacent over hypotenuse. The adjacent is x, the hypotenuse is 9, is equal to cosine 25. So again, now we're going to go to our calculator and we're just going to hit cosine 25, close the parentheses, hit enter, and we're going to get 0.906 is equal to x over 9. Now we're just going to go ahead and make this over 1 so that it's into a fraction, and we're going to cross multiply. 1 times x is 1x, and then 0.906 times 9, 0.906 times 9 is equal to 8.154. So x is equal to about 8. So this adjacent side is about 8 units tall. Okay, and let's go ahead and use this one more time, but this time hopefully we'll be able to use tangent. So again, the first step is to identify the sides that we have. So this is the angle that we have. So the 4 is the opposite. And then this side, because it's part of the angle, is the adjacent. So we're looking at the adjacent side and the opposite side. So with opposite and adjacent, we use tangent. So let's go ahead and write tangent of the angle. So the angle is 22 degrees is equal to opposite over adjacent. Okay, so how do we what do we plug in? Opposite is 4, adjacent is x, is equal to tangent 22. So how do we figure out what tangent of 22 is? We just put it in as tangent 22 parentheses. So tangent of 22 is 0.404 is equal to 4 over x. And we're going to go ahead and put this over 1. And now again, we have to cross multiply. So it's a little bit different. It's going to be 4 times 1, which is 4. And then 0.404 times x is 0.404x. And we just have to solve for x. So the way we solve for x is we just divide both sides by 404, 0.404. So in your calculator, do 4 divided by 0.404. And that is equal to, x is equal to 9.9. So the adjacent side is about 9.9 or 10 units tall. Okay, so that was my overview that I'm giving you today. In my next video, I can give you some applications of like real world scenarios where you use trigonometry. But for right now, that was just my overview. I hope that showing you this video, my real goal with showing you this video was to show you that things that seem so complicated don't have to be that, doesn't have to be that hard. Trigonometry sounds complicated. It sounds like you have to be a genius in order to do it. I'm not a genius. You're probably not a genius. If you are a genius, congratulations. But I just wanted you to see that it doesn't have to be that difficult. And I wanted you to have this overview because I want you to know that if you have this on a geometry, in a geometry class, or if you're taking an Accuplacer and there's going to be some trigonometry questions, I want you guys to know that they are doable if you just practice. So I would just say, if you learned anything by the end of this video, is that don't give up after just doing something one time. Do it over and over again. By the end of the video, even if you're tired of me saying sine, cosine, tangent, or what side is this, what side is that, what equation do we use, second tangent, if you're sick of all of that, it's good because that means you're starting to remember and you're starting to get used to what I'm doing. So stick to the videos, keep studying, and I'll see you in the